Hey guys, I'm Blue Spectre, and welcome back to the channel. If you're just finding us, I'm a Grandmaster competitive shooter and full-time firearms instructor. I travel all around the country teaching folks how to be faster and more accurate with pistols and rifles. And today, we are not doing the typical thing on the channel where we talk about how to be faster and more accurate. This is sort of an answer your questions kind of day, and a lot of your questions are about gear. Specifically today, we are going to be talking about these three optics: the Holosun 507 Comp, the Vortex Defender XL, and the Trijicon SRO. Probably the three most common optics that are used, kind of open emitter pistol optics that are used for performance shooters. Obviously competition, as well as, in many cases, concealed carry and even duty. Believe it or not, open emitters are not the only option for that kind of thing. We're not going to talk about the pros and cons about open emitters today. We're just going to kind of take the three main options I think you should look at in the open emitter space and talk about some of the pros and cons between these three, and hopefully maybe we'll help you figure out which one you should use if you're looking at adding a new optic to one of your pistols. Let's dive in. Probably the first thing people want to know is reliability. And this is probably the one thing where I'm not really going to give a ranking between the three, because it's obviously really difficult to quantify reliability between these optics. One of the things I've noticed is that they are all made out of glass, right? And so I don't really care who you are. You know, if you really care about like dropping these things on concrete or whatever the case may be, man, you do it enough, every single one of these is going to break, 100%. And these are not designed, again, with that particular use case in mind. These are, you know, performance optics, open emitters, and so they're designed more for performance shooting, not so much drop tests. I don't find those kind of tests particularly interesting or useful anyway, but that's not the point of these. With that said, I've got hundreds of thousands of rounds across these optics so far. I've only managed to break the glass on exactly one of them so far. And so, but again, I don't really provide a ranking there because I think they all will break. If you hit them the right way, you drop them. I don't drop my guns, but they're all going to break. They're all made out of glass. From there, additionally, it's tough because optics like the Defender XL are brand new. We don't really have a super long track record on these yet to know exactly how they're going to perform in the long term. However, I first saw, this is one of the newer optics in the market, obviously, but I first saw and I had a chance to shoot this about 3 years ago. It's been around for a while. My buddy's been running it for a long time. I've had it for quite a while. They seem to be good. They seem to be solid. I am cautiously optimistic about the XL and how it's going to hold up in the marketplace. Seems good. Now, the SRO and the 507 Comp have been around a little bit longer. They both seem to be really solid. The 507 Comp particularly, I've very rarely seen these have catastrophic failures. The one thing that seems to happen with these fairly commonly is they have the little battery tray, obviously on the side, with a super small screw here that you have to pull out when you want to change the battery. And that screw tends to sometimes vibrate back out and you lose the screw, if not the entire tray. And sometimes that's pretty tough to recover. That's a bummer. But other than that, you know, these seem really good to go. So do the SROs. Obviously, these are the optics that I've had by far the most rounds on across these three. And I've sent quite a few back to get repaired. If anything fails on them for me, it's not that they just break. It's just over time, you know, the electronics, you know, will fail eventually, right? With enough rounds downrange. So take it for what it's worth. Really hard to provide a ranking across these three, but I feel as of right now, plenty confident running any of these three optics on any of my guns. That's just me personally. Let's get now to the more interesting things. I think the things that really set these things apart and where there is pros and cons. Let's talk about the window size first. And this one's a little bit controversial in the sense that the numbers that I have published on these things, obviously I was one of the very first shooters to get like the XL in my hands before I was even allowed to talk about it, right? And so as soon as it was launched, I published my measurements on the window sizes. And my measurements are different from what the manufacturers say. Part of that's probably because we're measuring differently. The numbers that I published were usable window sides, and I will throw up the graphics on that have my actual measurements. To be very clear about the way that I measured these, like what I'm literally doing is taking, not these are garbage, these, a set of actual like digital calipers, right? And what I'm trying to measure with these, like using the front of the glass, I'm going and measuring inside of the shroud, like what is the actual usable part of the glass, right? And so those are the numbers that I came up with. And I took those like 6 months ago or whenever the XL came out, and I've just verified them and came up with the exact same results across the 3 random optics that I pulled off the shelf. So with that said, the number one thing that I care about in terms of window size is going to be the vertical space that's available. In other words, how tall is the usable window? For me, the SRO definitely is the winner in this category. The reason I care more about vertical space than horizontal space is because in recoil, the dot tracks vertically. The point of the glass is not to allow you to observe the target or a larger FOV downrange. I can do that with my support eye. All I'm really paying attention to inside of the glass is where's my dot? And of course, it's going to track vertically in recoil. So the more space that you have in that glass, the more it's going to allow you to see that dot as it's moving in recoil, which is going to be a thing for those who've taken the classes or are familiar with this kind of terminology. In Confirmation 2 is an example where you're shooting reactively, but you're trying to time it as the dot is just falling right back down onto the target. That's going to allow you to see that dot coming a little bit sooner if it leaves the glass entirely, or if you have a tall enough window, it gives you a better chance that the dot isn't going to leave the glass at all, both of which is somewhat useful. Again, having a shorter window is definitely not prohibitive. There may not even be a measurable performance gain, but I definitely prefer that glass to be a little bit taller when you're shooting, and the SRO definitely is the winner there, followed by the Defender XL. This is a very tall optic, lots of space there, and then we have the 507 comp. Now, where it gets another layer we could add here. Again, those measurements that I took were measuring the inside of the glass on the front of the shroud. If we were truly going to come up with a usable window measurement, I think we'd have to account for the actual body of the optic back here as well. The way that pretty much all of these optics are set up is that the actual glass on the front of the optic comes down lower than the rear of the body of the optic. I don't know if the camera will really be able to focus here. You can see it a little bit, right? When you look through that glass, you can see that a little bit of the window is obstructed by the actual rear of the optic back here. So there's a little bit of verticality there in the window size that is actually not fully usable, even when I just measure the exposed glass space here. What you'll notice is when you look at the optic bodies themselves, obviously using a DPP footprint, the Vortex is very tall here at the rear. The SRO is the thinnest out of all of them, and the 507 comp kind of comes in the middle. I'm not going to provide measurements on that one because it's pretty much impossible to measure from here to the top of the window with a great deal of precision, at least with the tools that I have. However, I will say that if we were going to account for that, the SRO would win even harder, right? So in terms of vertical glass space, which is what I really care about for window size, the SRO definitely wins in this category. That leads us to kind of shroud size, right? And so like the way I kind of look at it is, man, I want that glass to be tall. From there, I want the shroud of the optic to block the least amount of FOV. I don't want it to be obstructing my view, even though I can still see with the support side eye. I still want my strong side eye to be able to observe the target as unobstructed as possible. And once again, the SRO wins here. The last thing I mentioned as well, I also don't want that specifically that the bezel, if you will, the shroud, to be super large in width. And the reason why that's important is for concealed carry, things like printing, running duty holsters, all that kind of stuff. The thinner that optic is, the more it's going to be compatible with all those things and work better for those use cases. And again, having that optic be super fat just isn't actually useful. So when we look at the SRO, let's first of all compare here. Hopefully the camera, you'll be able to get a good look at it. So when I'll throw these measurements up on the screen, but we'll see that the 507 comp, which is this one right here, is by far the widest of these optics. Very nice and wide. You can really see, if you just kind of look down the barrel on this, how much of the optic is actually hanging off each side of the slide. It's significantly wider than the slide itself, versus if you look at something like the SRO, just how much slimmer and tighter it is. Obviously, we're looking hundredths and tenths of an inch here, but it's generally more narrow and is it just generally works better, right? I've never had a concern about this optic printing. It works in my duty holsters, and it's just generally I think a better size in general. And the last thing I mentioned there, obviously the Defender XL and the Holosun are both square, which is not a problem, but the SRO being round, you are kind of centering a round dot in the middle of a round window, and that feels a little bit more intuitive. Also, when you look at the actual shroud itself, it's definitely strong enough. It's not like, Delta Point Pro, level of fragility. It's a fairly robust shroud, but it really does a great job of not blocking your field of view too much. Whereas, obviously, the Holosun 507 comp is definitely a little bit thicker, definitely going to block a little bit more. And then the Vortex, man, that's a beefy bezel on there. Obviously, they're doing that, I think, primarily as a marketing effort. They have this stippling, if you will, really checkering, knurling maybe is the best term on the front of the optic. It's just supposedly designed to rack off things and so forth. That's not really useful for anybody, but maybe it works as a marketing thing. I don't know. But anyway, from that perspective, again, the SRO is in the lead on some of those features. Don't worry, the SRO is not going to run away with all the things I'm going to mention here today. Last thing, with regards to really the window, if we think about glass clarity, man, this is where the Vortex is really going to shine super strong. Very clear glass. This is the closest thing to like when I lift the Vortex up in front of my face. There's just really no distortion at all. Not a strong tint, nothing like that. It's very impressive glass. So if that's something that's important to you, honestly, the XL may be absolutely worthy of your consideration. The SRO I would kind of put in second place. It definitely has the classic Trijicon kind of blue tint. I'm not really bothered by that blue tint. Some people will really make a big deal out of it, and it's funny, they're typically wearing, pit vipers or other, eyewear that really add a strong tint to their vision, and that doesn't seem to bother them. But if there's any tint at all in the glass, that seems to be really bothersome. Honestly, I don't think when you're shooting and you have a really hard target focus, you'll notice that tint at all. The thing that I appreciate about the Trijicon glass is that it is clear. You don't have any trouble seeing what you're looking at, and it doesn't have much at all of a fisheye effect, which is, to me, the biggest issue that I found with the Holosun 507 comp. Man, I wanted to like this optic so badly. Obviously, it's a fraction of the price of the SRO. I know some of the guys at Holosun that seem to be like really squared away dudes, and really the one thing that makes me not use the Holosun too often, once I really put it through the paces, is for me personally, when I looked at that glass, there's just a little bit of a distortion, a little bit of fisheye. It kind of feels like it's almost not like a true zero magnification. There's almost like a little bit of zoom on there, if you will, like just very slightly. And it's enough that it's distracting to the eyes. It's almost like when I'm looking at the target, my left eye is seeing the target almost at a slightly different distance or focal plane from my strong side eye, and that's just distracting enough that it encourages me to sort of refocus my vision and get dot focused. I'm lucky enough to have been target focused as a shooter from the very beginning when I first picked up pistols, and so I generally don't struggle being dot focused at all when I'm shooting some of these other optics, but for whatever reason, when I'm shooting the 507 comp, man, it tends to suck my eye into that dot. And so for glass quality and clarity, I'll go ahead and put the Holosun in last place for that reason. So this one is one where the XL wins. I think the SRO comes in second. The 507 comp I would put in last place. Then we have the controls. Maybe I'm a little bit biased here, and this is just something I'm used to, but I'm a huge fan of the Trijicon controls. I really like the way they have these giant buttons on the side that are very easy to hit, like impossible to miss, whether you have gloves on, cold hands in the wintertime, whatever it is. When I go to grab that button and punch it on the side, it's very, very difficult to miss. It's also very tactile, so you can feel when you're clicking in those buttons. If you're trying to reprogram something where you need to hold or whatever, it's clear that you're doing that. And there's just one on each side. So again, if I have gloves or reduced sensitivity in my hands from cold or whatever it is, I don't have to like feel around and try to make sure that I'm actually hitting the correct button. I know all I have to do is put my thumb on this side of the optic and push, and that thing is going up. In second place, I would put the Defender XL controls. I like the same design here, really tactile buttons, easy to find, one on each side. Really, they probably tie with the Trijicon buttons, but just a little bit smaller. In last place for me personally, I would definitely put the Holosun 507 Comp controls. Again, we have two very small buttons that are not easy to feel at all, and they're on the same side of the optic. Obviously, one's forward, one's aft, so that may make sense to you. And they are fairly clicky, even though you don't necessarily feel the button moving that much the way you would on the SRO. There's not a lot of travel. You have that little bit of click in there. So they're still very usable, just not my personal preference on those controls. Additionally, when we look at the controls for zeroing the optic, I would put basically a tie here for the SRO and for the Defender XL. If you look at the SRO as an example, you can see the way that the screw here on the side is sort of, it's not a traditional flathead, it's sort of a concave slot in there. And of course, the reason for that is they want you to be able to take the most common tool you're going to have on every single range, or even if you're not on range, if you're just carrying this around in your pants and need to adjust it for some reason, you're always going to have a bullet or a shell casing or a piece of brass with you that you can put into that screw and very easily adjust your zero. The exact same thing applies to the Defender. We have a very similar screw design here on the back side, and then on this side, because the design, it is a little bit smaller, but it's still completely accessible with the piece of brass. Nice clicky adjustments, good to go. Holosun, somewhat like Aimpoint, loves to force you to use their like little tools for things, and so we have the smallest zero adjustment flathead you'll ever find. Generally, even like precision flatheads that you might find in your toolbox or whatever are not going to be small enough to adjust the 507 Comp, and you're going to have a quote-unquote Holosun tool around at your disposal. One of these little tools that they provide with the optic that has a super small flathead on it. If you don't have one of these to adjust a zero on your optic, you are kind of screwed. And again, on this one, we have pretty much the same size screw here for the battery compartment as well. So if you need to change the battery, again, you're going to need a very, very small flathead to do that. You're not going to be able to do it most likely with tools that you can just find around or handy when you're at the range or even at home, unless you have a Holosun tool handy. So to me, that's a bummer on the Holosun design for the 507 Comp. From there, I'll mention battery life. This is another one where I don't know that I would give a ranking other than to say I think the SRO is in last place in this one. Generally, unlike the RMR or the other Trijicon optics that I've played around with, 6 months is kind of pushing it with the SRO. Now, this has a lot to do with what mode you're running the SRO in, if it's auto brightness, and also what brightness level you run the SRO on. For me personally, most of my testing is with the 1 MOA version of the SRO, which means that I'm generally going to run it at a very high brightness setting, which is the combination that I really like. Super small dot, nice and bright. With that said, presumably because it's on a high brightness level, it is burning a lot of power, but I'm changing these out probably at least every 6 months or so. Honestly, I don't know that I've changed at least one Holosun. I don't think I've even changed the Defender yet, or either one of my Defenders, the STs or the XLs, since they both come out within the last year and a half or so. So both of those seem to be lasting over a year from my testing so far. So, look, the fact that the SRO only lasts 6 months doesn't really bother me. I have sort of, on my battery change general schedule, a bunch of things that I do on the first of the year, and then my birthday happens to be the first week of July, and so that first week of July is a good reminder for me, like, hey, some of my semi-annual stuff I'm going to go change out that first week of July, and I generally stay trouble-free with that sort of maintenance schedule. So not a big deal to me, but if you're worried about battery life, I would definitely put the SRO in last place. From there, though, battery size, both the SRO and the Defender XL are going to use the classic 2032, coin cell batteries that pretty much everything has. So you almost definitely have these hanging around for other things, optics, different things. And both the Defender and the SRO use that that battery, which is a good move in my book. The Holosun is the only one that does not. You can see, again, the number one thing I don't like about this optic is that small battery change tray on the side there, and it uses a smaller coin cell battery. I guess this is a symptom of the problem. I don't even know what size battery it is off the top of my head. It's like a 1532 or something. That's probably not right. But it's a smaller coin cell battery that I've never needed for anything else other than this particular optic ever, which is, again, somewhat unfortunate having to, hang around, have a different size battery just specifically for this optic. So in terms of battery sizes, personally, not a huge fan of that choice for the 507 comp. So where does that leave us across these three optics? Well, obviously, in terms of price point, I think right now the Defenders are probably winning. So definitely a good option to look at, as well as the 507 comp. Something else, but again, the SRO is probably maybe as much as double the price point of those two. So if you are price sensitive, that's definitely going to be something you look at in your budget. However, the way I look at optics, especially ones from good companies like Trijicon or Holosun or Vortex, is it's kind of a lifetime purchase. If they break, if you have issues, they're gonna get replaced. So even on something like an SRO, it's $400 and some lifetime purchase of an optic to go on your primary handgun. That frankly doesn't concern me at all. I just kind of buy what I want and run it when it's gonna be on a primary gun. Saving $200 or even $300 on something that critical is just hardly even on the radar to me. That's not because I have more money than everybody else. It's just because I really, really care about the quality of that kind of equipment. And so again, that $200, even if I have to save up for an extra month or two to get the optic that I want, that makes a whole lot of sense to me. So take that for what it's worth in terms of budget. The last thing I would think about with these dots is reticle options. Trijicon has pretty much the main things you want. First of all, some folks really like the Holosun because this is the only multi-reticle option you're going to find. So it comes with different reticle options that you can run all in the same optic. You don't have to buy different optics. It only has really one dot only size, and that's 2 MOA. I don't have a problem with 2 MOA. It's fine. It comes with a bunch of other stuff like rings you can put on there, circle dots, circle only, so on and so forth. To me, none of those are useful, and I don't know a single top shooter that's running anything other than dot only. I could go into that at length why that is, but just know you should just be running the dot. And I think that's pretty well established at this point. Again, I don't know a single top shooter that disagrees with that, so I don't feel the need to caveat that at all. All we really care about is the dot. And so with the Holosun, because it is multi-reticle, 2 MOA is the only option that you're going to find, but it seems like a pretty good option. With the Defender XL, the only two options they have right now are 5 MOA and 8 MOA. I'm a small dot person. I prefer the smaller dots, so that's a little bit big for me. May or may not be changing at some point in the near future. Keep an eye out for that from Vortex. SROs are going to have pretty much all the main options that I want, including 1 MOA, 2.5 MOA, 3.2 MOA, 5 MOA, right? There's lots of options there. And I really appreciate that from Trijicon. Again, the dot only is what I want, but folks have personal preference in terms of different dot sizes. And so I think it's good to have multiple dot options that are available there. But for me personally, I strongly prefer a 1 MOA dot in my optics, and that is what Trijicon offers. And as of right now, and probably for any time in the near future, Trijicon is the only place that I can find one MOA dot out of these 3 optics. So where does that leave you? Again, I would have absolutely no qualms whatsoever recommending any of these 3 dots. They are all quality optics. They all work super well. There's lots of other optics on the market right now that I'm not including in this conversation because I generally wouldn't recommend them for the most part. These are the 3 that I would look at. There's pros and cons between all of them. If you are looking for the best battery life on the market, maybe you'll look at a different optic than I will. If you're very budget conscious, if you need to equip, a bunch of pistols or something like that, maybe you'll look at one of the cheaper options. Right now, for me, my choice is still the Trijicon SRO, and I don't really see that changing anytime soon, but I am certainly open to seeing newer and better options on the market. So just a down and dirty kind of quick look at these 3 optics and why you primarily see me shooting the Trijicon SRO. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to drop those down below in the comments, and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. We'll see you next time.